The transport ship Meridian's edge shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere of Kepler-4 for to be, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Zara Blackwood gripped the armrests of her passenger seat, her knuckles white beneath her perfectly manicured nails. 23 years of working for the Nexus Banking Consortium had taken her to hundreds of worlds. But frontier planets always made her nervous. Too many variables. Too many desperate people with nothing left to lose. First time on a mining world, miss? Asked the pilot, a grizzled man whose cybernetic eye whirred as it adjusted focus through the viewport. Hardly, Zara replied, checking her tablet for the dozenth time. The figures hadn't changed. Kepler Mining Solutions owed the consortium 47 million credits, with interest compounding daily. Just another day at the office. The pilot chuckled. Office? Huh, lady, you're about to walk into a powder keg. The miners haven't been paid in 3 months. Corporate suits from the inner worlds aren't exactly welcome here. Zara smoothed her charcoal business suit and adjusted her neural interface headset. The pilot was right about one thing: she was definitely overdressed for a mining colony. But image was everything in her line of work. People needed to understand immediately that she represented serious money and serious consequences. The mining complex sprawled across a vast crater, its industrial structures looking like metallic growths emerging from the rust-colored landscape. Massive excavators sat idle in the open-pit mines, their operators long since departed for worlds with better prospects. The few buildings that showed signs of activity were concentrated around the main processing facility, where a skeleton crew still worked to extract whatever value remained from the dwindling ore deposits. Zara's transport touched down on a landing pad that had seen better days. The acrid smell of processed ore made her eyes water as she stepped out. In the distance, she could see figures moving among the industrial equipment, but none seemed to be heading in her direction. The administrative building was a prefabricated structure that had been expanded several times over the years. A young woman with prematurely gray hair looked up from a battered terminal as Zara entered. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, though her tone suggested she'd rather not. "Zara Blackwood, Nexus Banking Consortium," Zara said, producing her credentials. "I'm here to see whoever's in charge of operations." The receptionist's expression soured. "Another debt collector. I prefer asset recovery specialist," Zara replied smoothly. "This is your company's opportunity to work with us on a reasonable repayment plan before we're forced to take more drastic measures." After several minutes of raised voices from beyond the management door, the receptionist returned with a tall, lean man whose clothes bore the stains of honest work. "I'm James Morrison, operations manager," he said, extending a stained hand that Zara shook briefly. "Though I suppose that title doesn't mean much anymore. We've got maybe 30 people left on the payroll. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your candor," Zara said, following him into a small office. "But my concern is with the 47 million credits your company owes to my employers. I'm here to discuss repayment options." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Repayment options, lady? Take a look around. This place is dying. We've got maybe 6 months of extractable ore left, and that's if we can keep the equipment running. Which is why we need to discuss liquidation," Zara said, opening her briefcase and producing documents. "The consortium is prepared to take possession of all company assets in lieu of payment." "And what about the workers?" Morrison asked. "The families who've made this place their home?" Zara had heard this argument countless times before. "That's not my department, Mr. Morrison. I'm here to recover the consortium's investment, not to solve local employment problems." Morrison's face flushed with anger. "Your department? These are real people, not line items on a balance sheet." "I want to minimize the consortium's losses," Zara replied evenly, "which is what I'm paid to do. Now, if you'll sign these documents." "I'm not signing anything," Morrison said, standing abruptly. "This company may be in debt, but it's not dead yet." Zara sighed. She'd hoped this would be one of the easy ones. "Mr. Morrison, the consortium has legal mechanisms at its disposal to recover this debt. Asset seizure, security forces. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." The color drained from Morrison's face. "You can't be serious. This is a civilian operation. There are families here, children. which is why I'm encouraging you to sign these documents now. Zara said, "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with forced collection." As she left the administrative building, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Workers had gathered in small groups, their conversations stopping as she passed. She'd been in similar situations before, and she knew the signs. The miners were scared, angry, and desperate. A dangerous combination. Her transport was grounded for the night with engine trouble, forcing her to stay overnight. She was halfway back to range accommodation when she noticed the crowd. At least 200 miners had gathered in the main courtyard, their voices rising in heated discussion. At the center stood a woman Zara hadn't seen before. Tall, athletic, with short auburn hair and commanding presence. "Corporate parasites think they can just waltz in here and steal everything we've built," the woman was saying, her voice carrying clearly. "They sit in their comfortable offices on the inner worlds, making decisions about our lives, our futures, our children's futures." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. This was exactly the kind of situation she'd been trained to avoid. "But we're not helpless," the woman continued. "We have skills, we have knowledge, and we have something they don't. We have each other. They expect us to roll over and accept whatever scraps they throw us. But I say it's time to stand up and fight for what's ours." The crowd roared its approval, and Zara started to back away. But her luck ran out when one of the miners spotted her. "Hey, look, it's the corporate witch." All eyes turned toward Zara. The woman at the center stepped forward, her green eyes fixed on Zara with frightening intensity. "You must be the debt collector," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent. "I'm Raven Thorne, and I speak for the workers of this facility." "Miss Thorne," Zara replied, trying to project confidence despite her racing heart. "I'm here on legitimate business with company management. This matter doesn't concern the workers." Raven laughed without humor. "Doesn't concern us. You're talking about shutting down the only source of employment for 300 families. And you say it doesn't concern us?" "The consortium has a legal right to recover its investment," Zara said, aware her voice sounded defensive. "Your job is destroying our lives." Someone shouted from the crowd. Raven held up a hand, and the crowd quieted. "You say you're just doing your job, Ms. Blackwood. But what if I told you that your job is wrong? What if I told you that there's a better way?" "I'd say you're naive," Zara replied, though she found herself oddly drawn to the passion in Raven's voice. "The galaxy runs on contracts and debts. And what about human accountability?" Raven asked, stepping closer. "What about the accountability of corporations to the communities they exploit?" Despite herself, Zara found herself being pulled into a debate she didn't want to have. As the crowd dispersed with the setting sun, she found herself alone with Raven in the gathering darkness. "You're serious about this," Zara said finally, "about finding an alternative to liquidation?" "Dead serious," Raven confirmed. "These people deserve better than to have it all stripped away by corporate accountants. And you think you can make a difference?" Zara asked. "One person against an entire economic system." Raven smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "I think one person can always make a difference. The question is whether you're willing to be that person." As Zara made her way to the guest quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully ordered world was about to become much more complicated. She'd come to Kepler-4 for 2B to recover a debt, but she was beginning to suspect she might leave with something much more valuable and much more dangerous. For the first time in her career, Zara Blackwood wasn't sure which choice she was going to make. Marcus Kane had been awake for 36 hours straight, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when Nexus Banking Consortium security forces were scheduled to arrive in less than 48 hours, and certainly not when the woman Hood spent the last 3 days challenging everything he thought he knew about corporate debt collectors, was sitting across from him in the mining complex's makeshift war room. "The patrol schedules are here," Zara said, sliding a data pad across the metal table. Her perfectly pressed business suit had been replaced by practical work clothes, borrowed from the mining crew, but she still looked out of place among the rough-hewn miners and technicians who'd gathered for the emergency planning session. "Consortium security operates on a standard rotation 12-hour shifts," teams of 6, with their support on standby. Marcus studied the information, his weathered hands tracing the patrol routes. On the holographic display, 20 years ago, he'd been on the other side of operations like this, leading corporate security teams on asset recovery missions across the frontier worlds. He knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their protocols, but he'd never imagined he'd be using that knowledge to protect the very people he'd once been sent to suppress. "How do we know this information is accurate?" asked Tobias Merrick, the mining complex's chief engineer. His suspicious glare was fixed on Zara, and Marcus couldn't blame him. 3 days ago, she'd been their enemy. Now she was offering to help them fight her former employers. "Because I helped design these protocols," Zara replied evenly. "I've been part of 17 asset seizure operations. I know how they think, how they operate, what they expect to find." "And what do they expect to find?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair. The question had been nagging at him since Zara had approached him the night before, offering information in exchange for a chance to make things right. "Minimal resistance," she said. "Maybe a few angry workers staging a protest. Some equipment sabotage, possibly a barricaded administrative building. They're not expecting organized opposition." Raven Thorne, who'd been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke up, because they've never faced organized opposition before. "Frontier communities usually don't have the resources or the unity to fight back effectively. But we do," Marcus said, standing and walking to the wall display that showed the mining complex's layout. "Thanks to Ms. Blackwood's intelligence, we know they're coming. Thanks to Raven's organizing, we have 300 people ready to stand together. And thanks to Tobias's engineering expertise, we have home field advantage." Home field advantage only goes so far against military-grade weapons, Tobias pointed out. "These corporate security teams don't mess around. They've got plasma rifles, combat armor, atmospheric fighters. We've got mining equipment and determination." "Sometimes determination is enough," Marcus said, remembering his own transition from corporate enforcer to rebel fighter. It had started on a world much like this one. During an operation that had gone horribly wrong, he'd been ordered to clear a settlement of unauthorized colonists who'd refused to vacate land claimed by an agricultural corporation. What he'd found instead were families who'd been farming that land for 3 generations, children who'd been born there, elderly people who'd never known any other home. The operation had been a success by corporate standards. The colonists had been relocated to designated resettlement zones, and the land had been cleared for industrial farming. But Marcus had seen the faces of the children as they'd been loaded onto transport ships, heard the quiet desperation in the voices of parents who'd lost everything they'd worked for. He'd submitted his resignation the next day. "Marcus is right," Raven said, moving to stand beside him at the display. "Determination matters, but so does strategy. We can't just throw ourselves at their weapons and hope for the best." "Agreed." Marcus nodded. "Which is why we're not going to fight them the way they expect. We're going to make this too expensive, too complicated, and too public for the consortium to justify continuing." Zara looked puzzled. "To public information warfare," Raven explained with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The consortium's stock price depends on public perception. Shareholders get nervous when they see images of corporate security forces firing on civilian protesters." "You're talking about media manipulation," Zara said slowly. That's actually brilliant. The consortium's board is terrified of negative publicity." Marcus felt a grudging respect for the former debt collector. She was adapting to their perspective faster than he'd expected, and her insider knowledge was proving invaluable. But trust was something that had to be earned, especially from someone who'd spent decades serving the very system they were fighting against. "The question is," he said, turning to face Zara directly, "are you really committed to this? Because once we start, there's no going back. The consortium doesn't forgive traitors." Zara met his gaze without flinching. "I've been asking myself that same question for 3 days. The answer is yes. I'm tired of being part of a system that treats people like numbers on a balance sheet." "Pretty words," Tobias muttered. "But how do we know you won't change your mind when the shooting starts?" "Because," Zara said quietly, I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. I've spent 23 years doing nothing, telling myself I was just following orders, just doing my job. I won't do it anymore." The conviction in her voice surprised Marcus. He'd seen that same transformation in himself years ago, the moment when personal ethics finally overwhelmed professional obligations. It was usually permanent, but it was also dangerous. People who turned against powerful organizations rarely lived long, peaceful lives. "All right," he said finally. "Here's what we're going to do, Tobias. I need you to identify every piece of equipment that can be weaponized or used for defensive purposes. Mining lasers, excavation charges, atmospheric processors, anything that can give us an edge." "Already on it," Tobias replied, his earlier suspicion replaced by professional focus. "I've got teams working on modifications now. Won't be military grade, but it'll be effective enough." "Raven, I need you to coordinate with the other settlements on the planet. If word gets out that one mining community successfully resisted a corporate takeover, it could inspire others to stand up as well." Raven nodded. "I've got contacts on 3 other continents. They're watching to see what happens here." "And Zara," Marcus said, turning to the woman who'd been his enemy less than a week ago, "I need you to help us think like the consortium. What would make them reconsider this operation? What would make them decide it's not worth the cost?" Zara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table as she considered the question. "Embarrassment," she said finally. "Public embarrassment and financial uncertainty. If they start losing money instead of making it, if their shareholders start asking uncomfortable questions, they'll cut their losses and withdraw." "How do we make them lose money?" Marcus asked. "By making this operation take longer and cost more than they budgeted for," Zara replied. "Corporate security isn't cheap. Every day they spend here is money out of their profit margin. If we can drag this out for weeks or months instead of days, they'll start looking for a face-saving exit strategy." Marcus finished. "I like it. But that means we need to be prepared for a long siege, not just a quick victory." "The workers are already prepared for that," Raven said. "Most of them have families here, roots that go back years. They're not going anywhere." Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who'd decided to risk everything for a principle. Tobias, the engineer who could have taken a job anywhere, but chose to stay and fight for his community. Raven, the organizer who'd turned a group of frightened workers into a unified resistance movement. And Zara, the corporate enforcer who'd chosen conscience over career. "They expected us to surrender without a fight," he said quietly. "They expected us to accept their terms, take their settlement money, and disappear quietly into the night. Instead," Raven prompted. Marcus smiled grimly. "Instead, we're going to show them what happens when ordinary people refuse to be ordinary anymore. We're going to make them remember that behind every debt, every asset, every line item on their balance sheets, there are real human beings with real lives worth fighting for." Outside the meeting room, the mining complex hummed with activity as 300 people prepared for the fight of their lives. They were outgunned, outfinanced, and facing an enemy with virtually unlimited resources. By any rational calculation, they should have been preparing to surrender. But Marcus Kane had learned long ago that rational calculations didn't account for the human spirit. Sometimes when people were pushed far enough, when they had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for, they found strength they never knew they possessed. The consortium security forces would arrive expecting to find a demoralized group of workers ready to accept defeat. Instead, they would find something far more dangerous, a community that had decided to stand together. No matter the cost, they expected the miners to fall. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when people chose to stand taller than anyone thought possible. Tessa Voss had built her reputation on 3 simple principles: deliver on time, ask no questions, and never take sides in corporate wars. For 15 years, those principles had kept her independent trading vessel Fortune's Favor profitable, and her crew alive in the dangerous space between the inner worlds and the frontier colonies. But as she watched the Nexus Banking Consortium's assault fleet assemble at the edge of the Kepler 440 system, she realized her comfortable neutrality was about to cost her everything. "Captain," Her navigator Jules Brennan called from his station. "We're receiving multiple hails from the consortium fleet. They're ordering all civilian vessels to clear the system immediately." Tessa drummed her fingers against the arm of her command chair, calculating odds and profit margins with the cold precision that had made her one of the most successful independent traders. In the sector, the consortium fleet consisted of 12 warships and twice as many support vessels, enough firepower to reduce the mining colony to slag. If they chose to use it, any rational merchant would take the hint and find somewhere else to conduct business. But Tessa had never been entirely rational, and the cargo hold full of medical supplies and emergency rations she'd been contracted to deliver to Kepler-4 for to be represented 6 months of profit. More importantly, the mining colony owed her nearly 2 million credits for previous deliveries, money she'd never see. If the consortium succeeded in shutting down the operation, "Ma'am?" Jules prompted, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd been with her crew for 8 years, long enough to recognize the look that meant she was about to make a decision that would either make them rich or get them all killed. "Ignore the hails," Tessa said finally. "Plot a course for the planet. Low approach. Using the asteroid field for cover." "Captain," her communications officer Naya Hassan interrupted. "I'm picking up transmissions from the surface. Sounds like the miners are organizing some kind of resistance. There's talk about corporate security forces, defensive preparations, media campaigns." Tessa felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced during the Outer Rim. Conflicts when choosing the wrong side could mean the difference between profit and prison. "Put it on speakers." The bridge filled with overlapping voices as Naya cycled through the intercepted frequencies. Reports of weapon modifications, supply distributions, coordination with other settlements. But beneath the tactical chatter, Tessa heard something else, determination bordering on desperation. The kind of resolve that came from people who had nothing left to lose. "They're actually going to fight," Jules said quietly. "A mining colony against a corporate fleet. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the stupidest." "Sometimes there's not much difference," Tessa replied, remembering her own desperate fight for independence years ago. She'd been barely 18 when her father's shipping company had been absorbed by a larger corporation in a hostile takeover. Disguised as a merger, the executives had promised to honor existing contracts and retain personnel. But within 6 months, they'd liquidated the fleet and sold off the routes to competitors. Tessa had taken her inheritance, one aging cargo vessel, and a list of contacts who remembered her father's reputation for honesty, and built something new. It hadn't been easy. The established shipping cartels had tried to freeze her out, undercutting her prices and spreading rumors about her reliability. But she'd persevered, finding niches they couldn't or wouldn't fill, building relationships with clients who valued independence over corporate efficiency. Now she was watching another group of people face the same choice that had defined her life: surrender to corporate power or fight for the right to exist on their own terms. "Captain," Naya said, "I'm receiving a direct transmission from the mining colony. It's addressed to you personally, on screen," Tessa ordered, surprised. She'd done business with Kepler Mining Solutions for 3 years, but she'd never met their management. Face dash to dash face. The main viewer flickered to life, revealing a woman with short auburn hair and intense green eyes. Behind her, Tessa could see the industrial structures of the mining complex, but also something else: people moving with purpose, carrying equipment, building fortifications. "Captain Voss, I'm Raventhorn. I represent the workers of this facility, and I need to ask you a question that might determine whether we live or die." Tessa leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "I'm listening. Are you here just to collect payment for previous deliveries, or are you willing to consider a different kind of business arrangement?" "What kind of arrangement?" Tessa asked, though she suspected she already knew where this conversation was heading. "The kind where you choose a side," Raven said bluntly. "The consortium expects us to fold without a fight. They're counting on isolation, on the assumption that no one will risk corporate retaliation to help a group of miners. But if someone were to break that isolation, you want me to run supplies through a corporate blockade." Tessa said, "That's not trade, Miss Thorne. That's smuggling." I want you to help us prove that ordinary people can stand up to corporate bullies and win." Raven replied, "The medical supplies in your hold, we need them, not just for this fight, but for what comes after. We're not just trying to save our jobs, Captain. We're trying to build something better." Tessa felt the familiar weight of a decision that would change everything. She could honor the consortium's evacuation order, write off her losses, and find safer routes to profit. Or she could bet everything on a group of miners who had the audacity to think they could defeat a corporate empire. "What's in it for me?" she asked finally. "And don't tell me it's about doing the right thing. I've got a crew to think about, a ship to maintain, and bills to pay." Raven smiled, and for the first time since the conversation began, she looked genuinely hopeful. "Full payment for previous deliveries, plus a premium rate for any additional supplies we contract for. But more than that, exclusive trading rights with every settlement that joins our resistance. We're not the only mining colony facing corporate pressure, Captain. If we can prove this model works, we'll have customers throughout the frontier worlds. And if you lose," Tessa asked, "then you'll have made a statement that will inspire others to keep fighting." Raven said, "Sometimes that's worth more than money." Tessa looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew, Jules, who'd followed her from one dangerous venture to another without complaint, Naya, who'd given up a comfortable position with a corporate communications firm to join her ragtag opera, Shin, her engineer Rodriguez, who could make obsolete equipment perform miracles through sheer stubborn will. They'd all chosen independence over security, risk over certainty. They understood what it meant to bet everything on the belief that some things were worth fighting for. "Jules," she said finally, "how long until the consortium fleet reaches firing position?" 6 hours, assuming they maintain current course and speed. "Naya, open a channel to the mining colony. All frequencies." "Channel open, Captain." Tessa stood, straightening her jacket with the same care she'd once reserved for negotiations with corporate executives. "This is Captain Tessa Voss of the independent vessel Fortune's Favor. I'm here to fulfill a delivery contract with Kepler Mining Solutions, and I don't recognize any authority that says I can't complete my business arrangements." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "To the consortium fleet currently assembling in this system, you have no legal authority to prevent legitimate commerce between independent entities. Any interference with my vessel will be reported to the Galactic Trade Commission and prosecuted to the full extent of interstellar law." It was a bluff, of course. The consortium had enough political influence to tie up legal challenges for years, and the Trade Commission was notoriously reluctant to intervene in corporate disputes. But it would buy time, and time was what the miners needed most. "Captain," Jules said quietly, "once we do this, there's no going back. The consortium doesn't forgive or forget." "I know," Tessa replied, "but sometimes you have to choose between being safe and being right. I've been safe for 15 years. Maybe it's time to try being right for a change." As the Fortune's Favor began its descent toward the planet's surface, weaving between asteroids and sensor shadows, Tessa felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-stakes ventures. She was gambling her ship, her crew, and her future on a group of people she'd never met, fighting for principles she'd spent years avoiding. The smart money said the consortium would win. Corporate power, military superiority, and unlimited resources had a way of overcoming determination and moral conviction. But Tessa had built her career on taking calculated risks, and this felt like the most important calculation of her life. They expected her to run, to choose profit over principle, to maintain her comfortable neutrality while others fought for their survival. Instead, she was about to discover what happened when an independent merchant chose to stand with the people, who refused to bow to corporate power. The miners had asked her to choose a side. Now she would find out whether that choice would make her a hero or a cautionary tale. Phoenix Chen had been staring at the quantum resonance equations for 17 hours straight, her eyes burning from the blue glow of holographic displays that filled every available surface of her improvised laboratory. Empty coffee cups and half-eaten meal rations littered her workstation, testament to the fevered intensity with which she'd been working since the consortium fleet had arrived in orbit 3 days ago. "Phoenix, you need to sleep," said her assistant, David Park, as he entered the converted storage bay that had become their research facility. His concerned expression was illuminated by the swirling mathematical projections that dance between them. "You've been at this non-stop since the siege began. Sleep is for people who aren't trying to revolutionize faster-than-light communication," Phoenix replied, without looking up from her calculations. Her fingers moved across the haptic interface with practiced precision, adjusting variables in equations that most physicists would have considered theoretical impossibilities. "Besides, we're running out of time." Through the reinforced windows of the mining complex, she could see the flickering lights of the consortium blockade warships, positioned at every possible escape route, their weapons trained on the planet's surface. For 3 days, the miners had held their ground through a combination of clever tactics and sheer bloody-minded determination. But Phoenix knew that conventional resistance could only delay the inevitable. What they needed was something the consortium hadn't anticipated, couldn't counter, and wouldn't see coming until it was too late. What they needed was a miracle wrapped in advanced physics and powered by the kind of desperate innovation that only emerged when ordinary people were pushed beyond their limits. "The quantum entanglement array is stable," David reported, checking readings from the experimental equipment they'd assembled from mining sensors and communication relays. "Coherence is holding at 97%, well within operational parameters." Phoenix nodded absently, her mind racing through the implications of what she was attempting. Faster-than-light communication had been theoretical for decades. The ability to transmit information instantaneously across vast distances using quantum-entangled particles. The major corporations had spent billions trying to develop practical applications, but the technology had always proven too unstable, too energy-intensive, too unpredictable for reliable use. But Phoenix wasn't working with corporate resources or corporate constraints. She was working with salvaged mining equipment, improvised components, and the kind of boundary-pushing creativity that came from having nothing left to lose. "David, what's the status on the transmission nodes?" "Tess's crew finished installing the last one an hour ago," he replied, consulting his tablet. "We've got 17 nodes positioned throughout the colony, all linked to the central array. If your calculations are correct, we should be able to establish instantaneous communication with any settlement within a 50 light-year radius." "Not just communication," Phoenix corrected, finally looking up from her equations. Her dark eyes held a gleam that David had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. "Documentation, evidence, real-time transmission of everything that's happening here to journalists, government officials, and civilian populations throughout the sector." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. The consortium's power depended on controlling information as much as controlling resources. Corporate media outlets could be bought or intimidated. Government investigators could be delayed or misdirected. And isolated frontier communities could be silenced before their stories reached sympathetic audiences. But instantaneous communication changed everything. If Phoenix's quantum array worked, the entire galaxy would be able to witness the miners' resistance in real time. Every act of corporate aggression, every moment of civilian courage, every example of ordinary people standing up to overwhelming odds would be transmitted instantly to worlds where public opinion still mattered. Phoenix had been a corporate researcher, once working for Stellar Dynamics' Advanced Physics Division. She'd been brilliant, well-paid, and completely miserable. The breaking point had come during the Centauri mining incident, when Stellar Dynamics had covered up a reactor failure that had killed 300 workers. Phoenix had tried to go public with evidence of the company's negligence, only to find herself blacklisted, discredited, and facing criminal charges for violating corporate confidentiality agreements. She'd fled to the frontier worlds, taking her knowledge and her burning desire for justice to places where corporate influence was weaker, and the need for technological innovation was desperate. For 5 years, she'd worked as an independent consultant, helping mining operations and agricultural colonies solve problems that the major corporations couldn't or wouldn't address. Now she was facing those same corporations again, but this Time she had allies, resources, and a chance to prove that innovation driven by principle could overcome technology motivated by profit. Incoming transmission from the Surface Command Center. David announced, activating the communication system. Marcus Kane's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim but determined. Phoenix, what's your status? We've got reports that the consortium is bringing in specialized equipment, signal jammers, communications disruptors, the works. They're planning to cut off all contact with the outside world before they move to the final phase of their operation. They're too late, Phoenix replied with more confidence than she felt. The quantum array is operational. We can begin transmission in 30 minutes. What do you need from us? Marcus asked. Time, Phoenix said simply, and a way to get word to our contacts on the receiving end. The entangled particles are already in place, but someone needs to activate the corresponding rays on their end. Tessa's people are handling that, Marcus replied. Her trading network includes contacts on 17 worlds, all of them with reason to oppose corporate expansion. They're standing by to receive your transmissions. Phoenix felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, came down to the next few hours. If her quantum communication array worked, the miners' resistance would become a galactic phenomenon, inspiring similar uprisings throughout the frontier worlds. If it failed, they would all face corporate justice with no witnesses and no hope of rescue. Phoenix, David said quietly, the power coupling to Sector 7 is fluctuating. If we lose that node, we'll lose coverage for the entire eastern perimeter. Then we fix it. Phoenix replied, grabbing her toolkit and heading for the exit. David, monitor the array status and begin the pre-transmission sequence. I'll be back in 20 minutes. The corridors of the mining complex hummed with activity as Phoenix made her way toward the damaged power coupling. Workers hurried past carrying weapons, medical supplies, and communication equipment. Children huddled in reinforced shelters, while their parents prepared for what might be their final stand against corporate oppression. These people were counting on her, Phoenix realized, not just for technical solutions, but for hope, the hope that genius and determination could overcome vast resources and institutional power. She reached the damaged coupling and immediately saw the problem. A power surge from the mining equipment had overloaded the improvised connections, threatening to cascade through the entire quantum array. It was exactly the kind of technical failure that corporate engineers would have anticipated and planned for, but Phoenix wasn't a corporate engineer anymore. She was something far more dangerous, a brilliant scientist with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Working with focused intensity, she rerouted power through secondary systems, reinforced critical connections, and implemented backup protocols that would keep the array operational even if half the nodes failed. As she worked, she could hear the distant rumble of atmospheric fighters beginning their final approach. The consortium had grown tired of waiting, tired of negotiating, tired of dealing with a group of miners who refused to accept the inevitable. Phoenix to command center, she said, activating her comm unit as she made final adjustments to the power coupling. Ray is operational and stable. Beginning transmission in 10 minutes. Copy that. Phoenix, came Marcus's voice. And Phoenix, thank you. Whatever happens next, you've given us something they can never take away, the knowledge that we fought back. As Phoenix returned to her laboratory, she felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. In 10 minutes, the entire galaxy would witness the courage of ordinary people refusing to surrender to corporate power. They expected her technology to fail, expected her improvised equipment to collapse under pressure, expected her quantum theories to prove as impractical as corporate researchers had always claimed. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when an engineer chose to stand taller than the systems that had tried to break her. The quantum array hummed to life, its entangled particles reaching across space to connect isolated frontier communities with the wider galaxy, and the message they carried would change everything. The quantum transmission array erupted to life, just as the first consortium drop ships breached the atmosphere, their hulls glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Phoenix watched her displays with fierce satisfaction as data streams flowed instantaneously across 50 light-years of space, carrying real-time footage of corporate military forces descending on a civilian mining colony. To 17 different worlds. Transmission confirmed on all channels, David reported, his voice tight with excitement and terror. We're getting responses from Arcturus Station, New Geneva, even the core worlds. The feeds are going viral. Through the laboratory windows, Phoenix could see the drop ships landing in perfect formation round the mining complex's perimeter. Armored figures poured out, corporate security forces equipped with military-grade weapons and authorization to use whatever force they deemed necessary to complete their mission. But this time, the galaxy was watching. Phoenix, get to the command center. Marcus's voice crackled over the comm system. We're coordinating the final phase. She grabbed her portable ray controller and ran through corridors filled with miners, taking defensive positions. The quantum transmissions were working perfectly, but technology alone wouldn't save them. What they needed now was the kind of unity that could transform individual courage into collective power. The command center buzzed with activity as the 4 architects of the resistance gathered for what might be their final strategy session. Marcus stood at the tactical display, his weathered face reflecting the weight of command. Raven moved between communication stations, coordinating with settlements across 3-star systems that had declared solidarity with their cause. Tessa monitored shipping routes where her trader contacts were spreading word of the resistance to every port and station in the sector. And Zara Blackwood, the former debt collector who had risked everything to stand with them, was doing something no one had expected. She was negotiating. Consortium Command, this is Zara Blackwood, Senior Asset Recovery Specialist, she said into her comm unit, her voice carrying the authority of 23 years of corporate service. I'm requesting immediate cessation of hostile activities, pending review of new financial projections. Blackwood, you're in violation of your contract and corporate loyalty agreements. Came the harsh response from the orbiting command ship. Return to the extraction point immediately or face charges of treason against corporate interests. Sir, I'm transmitting revised asset valuations that fundamentally change the cost-benefit analysis of this operation. Zara continued smoothly. Current resistance levels indicate projected completion time of 6 to 8 months, with estimated security costs exceeding 400 million credits. Meanwhile, real-time galactic media coverage is causing measurable damage to consortium stock valuation. Phoenix watched admiringly as Zara played the corporate game with masterful precision, using their own language of profit and loss to buy precious time. The quantum feeds are working, Raven reported from her station. I'm getting confirmation from resistance cells on 14 different worlds. 3 agricultural colonies have declared independence from corporate oversight. 2 mining settlements have expelled their corporate administrators. The movement is spreading faster than we dared hope, and it's costing them, Tessa added, monitoring financial networks through her trader contacts. Consortium stock is down 18% since the transmissions began. Their board of directors is demanding explanations. Marcus studied the tactical display, where red dots representing consortium forces were advancing steadily toward their defensive positions. The question is whether we can hold out long enough for the political pressure to force them to withdraw. We don't just need to hold out, Phoenix said, adjusting her ray controls as new transmission requests flooded in from across the galaxy. We need to prove that ordinary people can build something better than what the corporations are offering. She activated a new communication channel, broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every settlement in the sector. This is Phoenix Chen, speaking from Kepler-4 for DB. 3 days ago, we were facing extinction at the hands of corporate debt collectors. Today, we're part of a galactic network of communities, choosing cooperation over exploitation, innovation over extraction, hope over fear. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices from dozens of worlds joined the transmission, farmers reporting increased yields from cooperative growing techniques, miners sharing new extraction methods that preserved local ecosystems, traders organizing networks that bypassed corporate middlemen entirely. They're building it in real time, Raven said with wonder in her voice. A whole new economy based on mutual aid instead of corporate control, sir. Zara said into her comm unit. I'm now showing projected losses in excess of 2 billion credits. If current operations continue, the board's emergency session has been called, and shareholders are demanding immediate de-escalation. The response from Consortium Command was a long silence, followed by cursing that would have made a freight hauler blush outside. The corporate security forces had reached the outer defenses, but something unexpected was happening. Instead of the quick victory they'd anticipated, they were facing coordinated resistance from people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Mining equipment had been converted into defensive weapons. Communication arrays allowed perfect coordination between scattered positions. And most importantly, every act of corporate aggression was being broadcast instantly to a galaxy that was growing. Increasingly sympathetic to the miners' cause, Consortium Command to all units, came a new voice over the intercepted channels. Cease offensive operations immediately. Repeat. Cease all offensive operations pending new orders from the board. The command center erupted in cheers. But Phoenix knew their victory was more than military, it was transformational. The quantum communication array had done more than just document their resistance. It had connected isolated communities across the galaxy, allowing them to share resources, knowledge, and hope in ways that corporate-controlled networks had never permitted. Incoming transmission from the consortium fleet, Zara reported, a smile spreading across her face. They're requesting negotiations for orderly withdrawal. Marcus looked around at his unlikely allies, the debt collector who had chosen conscience over career, the merchant who had risked everything for principle, the engineer who had turned corporate rejection into revolutionary innovation, and the organizer who had transformed fear into fierce determination. They expected us to fall, he said quietly, expected us to accept their terms, surrender our dreams, and disappear into their corporate machinery. Instead, Raven added, we stood taller than they thought possible. Through the windows of the command center, they could see corporate security forces beginning their withdrawal. But more importantly, Phoenix's quantum arrays were still transmitting, still connecting, still proving that ordinary people with extraordinary determination could build something better than what the powerful were willing to offer. The miners of Kepler-4 had won more than just their freedom. They had sparked a galactic renaissance of cooperation, innovation, and hope, and the message they had sent would echo across the stars for generations to come. When people choose to stand together, no force in the galaxy can make them fall.